Okay, so I guess Marni, is that you there? Okay,
Thanks for having
excellent. I was wondering whether we were going to be having you on. Marni Jo Snyder, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, SnyderLawyer.com. Thousands of cases and a huge background as a former Philly assistant public defender and law clerk. I'm not going to go into all those credentials because we've just had some really riveting and powerful testimony in this court. Marni, we're going to break this all down, but general thoughts? I mean, you've been in and out of that courtroom your whole career, as I have. Pretty powerful. What do you think?
It was very powerful, and I thought that all of the family gave really beautiful statements, not the same type of thing that you hear where people, sometimes this kind of drama renders people speechless. I think that one of the powerful things is that they were really asking why. And as we got to Mr. Watts's parents, it seemed as though they were working on thawing him out to try to say, when the time comes, we do need to know why. We're now accepting, not like in the press last week, but we're now accepting that you did this. We just need a reason why. But then I thought the district attorney's statement really would put a chill on that again, by bringing out every little thing and saying, we know why, because this is so disgusting and so heartless. I think that doesn't leave a lot of room for Chris Watts to want to talk anytime soon. But certainly it was effective in getting the consecutive sentences that they were seeking.
Yeah, I'm a little confused, Marni. Maybe you can help me out. Having been a death penalty prosecutor, homicide prosecutor, ahead of an agency like the prosecutor that allocated today, you have the death penalty on the boards. You are going to get a death penalty conviction, in my opinion, with this case. I have the aggravating and mitigating factors under Colorado law, and I have never seen more aggravating factors. I count, 3 and 4, 7 aggravating factors. Okay, so it's about as bad as it gets. But here's the deal. I get abiding by the victim's family's decision, but before I'm doing that, you are coming into my office in a proffer session, and you are going to stop all of the Band-Aids and all the lies and all the deception, and you are going to give us verse and chapter about every single thing you did and why you did it. I'm sorry to be agitated about this, but our great chatters are at the Long Crime Network chat room feel just like I do. This family is now left with a big hole, a big question mark. Everyone is. Every single person said it, including the district attorney. But the district attorney had the ability to straighten that out before he gave him a walk.
Yeah, I agree. That is absolutely one way to do it. We don't know whether or not Mr. Watts was asked to come in, whether or not he did. But I do think that the speech was strange in light of the fact that there's still this question mark. It really kind of said, I think he said exactly that, that nothing could ever satisfy, no reason could ever satisfy any of us. Well, obviously, no one would agree with whatever reason he gave, but certainly knowing why this crime happened, understanding how it happened exactly, that could go a long way in having the victims of this case kind of start to move on with their lives and feel like there's actual closure. So I thought it was very strange how hard he came at him, knowing that there's mandatory sentences on this, when it just seemed as though it was thawing out. The family, his family, Mr. Watts's parents, had said, you know what, we get it now. We had the evidence explained to us in a better way. We know that you did this.
Yeah,
and you need to
I need a better explanation than that, from the prosecutor. I want to know why you made a decision when you brought out very eloquently the community was impacted, the EMS and the firefighters and the hazmat people and the families themselves on both sides, each allocated that they wanted to know why. And now, without the ability of using the legal process, you mark my words, Marni, they are going to be interviewing him, and he'll be given fake and false statements for the next 20 or 30 years should he survive that long in the prison. The prosecutor had the ability to nail it down now, and to be standing up there, I'm just confounded, to be standing up there saying we don't know why or how, and he probably would have lied to us, is confounding. They'll never get a direct answer as a result of this. Listen, you know what? He's not the only person that wants to know why and how. It's also the victim's father that wants to know why and how. Let's take a look at that clip. Well, Marni, There's nothing, in my opinion, I mean, it's brutal all the way through, but the themes that Dad is saying is that I expected and trusted that you would take care of my daughter and these two little girls. Look at that picture that we got right there, these beautiful, beautiful people. And then you took them and threw them out like trash. He saw the tape, Marni, buried the daughter in a shallow grave and put the two children in oil, crude oil, and basically calling them an evil monster and God have mercy on your soul. Can you imagine that the torment of a father? I think it's a little bit different what I've seen in court, that he sees that he passed off the baton to Christopher Watts to take care of his little girl and their two grandchildren, and now they're all gone. What do you think?
Well, this case moved very quickly. You know, this just went on this summer with the search, and I think that Dad's kind of still blaming himself. At the same time, knowing that Mr. Watts is to blame for doing this, but I think he feels like he passed on his little girl. I mean, that's obvious, and I think that's a sentiment that any father would feel when they lose their daughter to a domestic murder like this, a domestic violence situation.
You know, Marni, in the past, I had a domestic violence death penalty case, and that is exactly what the father felt. He felt, but there was a history of problematic behavior there. And I'm not sure that we heard, I mean, by all accounts, we're hearing that there wasn't these signs. And so in order for the father that you see on TV right now to evaluate what he could have done better, you'd want to know the answers to those questions of what or why, or was there something that we missed, or did this just come out of left field? I mean, if I were the father, I'd be like, did I just miss something? But we're never going to know.
Right. I mean, I think that, again, that's why I was kind of disappointed in the district attorney's speech, is because there is this opportunity. There's this more intimate reason for this to have happened. The prosecutor obviously has a theory of the case, which is that he was cheating on his wife, wanted to get out of the marriage, and is a violent, horrible human being, and that's why rather than divorce. He could have led with what they've gleaned from the evidence and also asked Mr. Watts to come to the family and tell them what they're missing.
Marni,
and I was upset
what was confounding to me, to add to what you just said, was that he actually references a previous false statement as the potential for the motive in the case, when he had every legal tool in his tool chest to say it's death penalty unless you come in and give us credible, truthful information. I'm confounded by this.
I don't understand it either. And it appears that the evidence was really compelling to Christopher Watts's parents, who now kind of understand he did need to take responsibility for this. There was an overwhelming amount of evidence.
Right.
You just weren't understanding it all before.
Okay,
so
Marni,
we know there's a lot to be seen.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I appreciate your analysis. We're going to have you on much more with regard to this. We have just seen one of the most riveting sentencing hearings in the Christopher Watts case. We're going to have to take a break, but we'll be back on the other end. Stay tuned. Okay, so you see the victim's brother there allocuting to the court. Marni, I also have another guest that we're going to bring on. Larry Pozner is a lawyer, an author, a lecturer, high-profile criminal defense attorney. He's got multiple awards and distinctions and writings and writing books on cross-examination. You know, Larry, I typically go much more in depth with regard to people's biographies, but like with you and Marni, we all know that you're the real deal for sure. That's why you're here. But let's get right to this testimony, Larry. Let me start with you. I've been talking to Marni about this, and we've been going in the chat room and watching people that are really confounded by the idea that the prosecutor did not sew up the why in this case so that there isn't this big question mark as to why he did it or the reasons or the motivations behind it. What are your thoughts, Larry?
I don't think we ever understand how this case happens. It just doesn't play out under any pattern we can understand. I do think
to the brother, probably the most edgy of the witnesses there. You took away my title, Uncle Frankie. I tell you, it's just heart-wrenching to me. And he brings up some good points. You'll never hear the word dad or daddy again. And, you know, you can tell that telling the truth is more than you're capable of doing. I thought very pointed. and then said, you should thank us because we asked the district attorney to spare your life. How did you find his testimony?
I thought his was the most pointed. I agree. But also, he is the one that really addressed Mr. Watts being a danger to the community in the future, and why that for him this had to be a life sentence with no parole, other than just sparing his life. He obviously has characterized Mr. Watts as a domestic abuser that would treat other women this way if he were allowed to be free and start new relationships. And I think that he thinks it's really important for him to be incapacitated in prison for the rest of his life. And so he really touched on that, which is interesting because he's a non-lawyer. And so the idea that he really brought in that aspect of sentencing and talked about it in an intelligent way was great.
Right. Both men so far, we've listened to dad and now we've listened to the brother. And, I know that everybody wants to say all things are equal or whatever, but there's not. There's different emotional components to people based upon family dynamics. And so in addition to dad, now you have the brother talking about the word betrayal, trust. We trusted you to take care, in this case, his sister and his two nieces, and you failed in that responsibility. This is the theme now from the two boys. But there's more to come from the woman's side of the equation, including the victim's mother. Let's take a look. Well, that's the victim's mother, who is also suffering such tragic loss because of the loss of her grandchildren. Larry, I hope you're back with us, but we hear a lot of conversation of the mercy of God in this woman. I love the themes here. She talked about how the daughter put a crown on your head like a king, and the day you killed her, God took that crown off. And that as we trusted you like a son, again, back to that trust theme. And I guess you didn't know, if you didn't, that the two girls, or one of the girls, wrote the song, Daddy, You're My Hero. Wow. What are your thoughts, Larry?
This is just so profoundly sad. It is unbelievable how much compassion this victim's family is showing. And it also shows how quickly there can be some sense of at least legal closure by getting that guilty plea, an automatic life without parole sentence, and not going through the years of death penalty litigation. I think it's hard to understand, well, it's impossible to understand the crime. It's hard to appreciate the compassion, but this family is coping with it as well as I have ever seen any family deal with a tragedy of this magnitude.
Larry, I'm going to throw this to each of you, and Marni as well. When I was prosecutor and had to make the ultimate calls in these murder cases, I would try to bring people to the understanding that nothing we're going to do here is going to bring them back. That after the pressure goes down and they go to jail for the rest of their lives, you're still going to be there with a great sense of loss. And I've always found it very confounding to me that some had this spirituality. Let's take this a little bit of a sidebar, because this is all part of the law. This spirituality about them that allowed them to muscle through, and others who were in that place of brittleness and hatred that just wanted revenge seem to me to be the ones that wound up addicted, suicide, and that. Have you noticed these kind of themes in your career as a lawyer? I'll start with you, Marni.
Yeah, I think that what happens is people think that the death penalty is going to bring closure to the case. Really what it brings is years and years of litigation, but it's not going to bring closure even if that person is executed, because they're not on this earth to ever make amends with. They're not available to you if that's somewhere that you want to go. You've closed the book on ever having any sense of restorative justice and getting to speak to the other person. And so I have noticed that, people who want the death penalty and say that they want it are in court every 2-3 years for their whole lives waiting for this person to be executed. They are in pain. They are unable to move on. Those who are successful, meaning not on drugs or suicidal, are still hurting all of the time.
Yeah, Marni, Larry, I'm going to have to get back to you on the other end of the break, but I will say this. I literally was in the middle of trying a death penalty case as a prosecutor where the family was just, please stop, end it. It's been years, it's months that we're trying this case. They were worn out, beaten up. But I think the spiritual resiliency of this family, Larry, I'm looking forward to hearing what your answer is, because I think with most tragedies in life, sometimes you got to go down deep, and that's the only place, and in fact, a good place to be, is relying on God's judgment as to what to do. At least that's what this family is saying in the Christopher Watts matter. Let's go to break. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back. Okay, Marni and Larry, I'm sorry to harp on this. We're in the Christopher Watts sentencing. I'm even more agitated now for two reasons. So our viewers in the chat room want to know one question, Larry, and each one of you gets to answer this. So the first one, how does she get to give not the statement of the mom and dad she represents? She's just giving a lawyerly, she's not speaking on behalf of them. All right, so that's the first question some are asking. Shouldn't she just be reading their statement as she said she would in the beginning? And the second thing is, I am really getting agitated by this the more I hear it. There will be a time, sometime, for a full confession and accountability that has not occurred here, so that it can bring peace to the people that have been affected by this. And even the lawyer recognizes this failure. Larry, you start first with those two questions.
Well, I'm not sure why she was allowed to speak. Under the Victims' Rights Amendment, certainly all of the family members get to speak. Usually a lawyer does not speak. But I think what happened here is the judge must have looked at this and said, she is not here representing them as parents of the defendant. She is here representing them as grandparents, and perhaps that is why the judge allowed it. Now, this crime is so horrible, so completely beyond our understanding. But the compassion being shown on both sides, by both families, to each other, is worthy of note, is profound. And this discussion that the families, both sides, deserve a confession, an understanding of how this unspeakable crime happened, is worthy of note. I see more coming together in this moment of horrible tragedy than I almost ever see in a court.
We see that often, Larry, that it brings good people together too, for sure. But Marni, Fight for TA wants an answer. How is this possible? I don't agree that a lawyer can just get up there if they represent the grandparents. The grandparents under the Victims' Crime Bill are given an opportunity to speak, for sure. There's certainly a class within the ability to do that with the court. But that's not what this lawyer did. They didn't read the statements of the two. They gave their own position.
Right. My guess, and this is pure speculation, is that it could have been by agreement with the district attorney. And I'll tell you why, because these parents had made some statements in the press recently where they said that their son had been coerced into a plea, and they disagreed with the evidence. And it's very obvious that they went into a meeting, they kind of referenced it by implication, with the district attorney and looked at more of the evidence to understand exactly what they had on their son, exactly what had happened that he might have been ashamed to tell them during a visit, and they got behind this plea. And I think that this was probably really important for upholding the plea, because the judge can say, no, I'm not accepting a plea to life, and kind of toss it back at the prosecutor. But in order to convince the judge and convince the public, they probably let her put into more eloquent terms what the family now understood to be true.
Yeah, listen.
And thank goodness they did, because they really were not in favor of this plea a week ago.
It certainly is within the discretion of the court to allow this to run. It wasn't unlawful to do that. But, riddle me this, and it's just really a rhetorical question. How was it? This was damage control because of that interview they gave, and that's fine. They're suffering, and I get that, and I wish them no ill will at all. They're not the cause of this. But how did they go to the prosecutor's office, to the district attorney's office, and come out with any clear answers? Because we still don't have the answers, because they never asked the son when they had an opportunity to. So I think that it's more towards damage control and them coming to the reconciliation point point that they realized he did it, but they, like you and me and our audience in the chat room and everyone in that courtroom, still doesn't have an answer to the critical question that that lawyer herself stated is necessary for peace. That's her word, not mine, is why. I guess we'll never figure that out. We're going to break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We are in the Christopher Watts analysis. The sentencing occurred today. It was really a no-brainer as to what he was going to get, multiple consecutive life without parole sentences. But it's what went on inside of that courtroom and the absolute riveting testimony, everything from the most horrific details that you can imagine as the man killed his pregnant wife and two beautiful children and stuck them in drums of oil and the wife in a shallow grave, all the way to multiple references to the mercy of God and forgiveness. This was, by estimations of a homicide guy that's done it for 30 years, a real wowsy of a case inside there. There's a lot of texture to it. I got Marni and Larry with me. They're going to follow it through. But we've been asking this question as to why the prosecution didn't do a little more on getting us the motive behind all of this that they had when they had that opportunity, because everyone kept asking question mark, why, how come, maybe we'll figure it out later on. Well, let's listen. I give him credit. I give the district attorney credit, a little bit like me. He walked in as the head guy in the courtroom, and with the cameras heat burning them down, and with a very high profile case, he allocated. He didn't leave it behind to one of the junior people. I like that style, but let's see substantively if there's some issues.
Your Honor, there are no words to adequately describe the unimaginable tragedy that brings us before this court today.
All right, I guess we're having some audio problems. I see some of that in the chat room, and we apologize for that. You know, listen, the Law and Crime Network, if you don't know right now, has just moved its studio to a bigger, more spacious facility, a cooler facility. Those guys who watch me, you know, I'm usually breaking out in a sweat. It's really an amazing... Okay, I got a lot of voices going on inside my head, and I'm not sure whether that's Bob Bianchi again or whether that's the room. But nevertheless, we are in a new studio, and we're looking forward to really bringing you some great programming going forward. So stick with us if there's some technical glitches. We're not sure if that's the clip or whether or not that's something here. Anyway, Larry, that's the prosecutor, Michael Rourke. Now, you're out there in Colorado. Is that a typical thing that the head district attorney gets up and allocutes and makes a sentencing argument?
The head, unless they're running for higher office. This part of the case is astonishing, and he has lent dignity to a proceeding. He has not tried to soapbox it or to paint it in any way that glorifies the prosecution of the case. He has come at it, it seems to me, in a very humanistic way. And when we talk about restorative justice, I don't think we're talking in cases like this about forgiveness. We are talking about not even damage control. We're talking for these families about damage survival. And by lending dignity to this process, and closure at least to the legal aspect, I think he's helping both families. And my thoughts are he has done a good job of dealing with his responsibilities and explaining to the public what he did and why in making this disposition.
Okay, well, listen, as a guy who went into court repeatedly as the head guy myself, which apparently bothered people, to be honest with you, sometimes they didn't think that was appropriate. And I'm like, I'm a lawyer and was an assistant prosecutor, and a criminal defense lawyer before I was the prosecutor. I run the office. I can go in anytime I want, for whatever reason I want, argue a sentence, try a case. And I thought that was important to lead by example. So I do respect that dignity he is bringing both to the process Larry, as well as to his office, that loves to see a leader that doesn't just tell people what to do, but is willing to get up there and face the heat and the fire themselves, get on their 2 feet and make the argument, rather than shooting from the peanut gallery, the cheap shots of people that are really doing the job. It reminds me of that great poem that I love and have hanging in the wall, The Man in the Arena. The only bad thing about that from Teddy Roosevelt was it wasn't gender neutral, but we had it hanging up in our office. So we are going to go to that prosecutor. Let's see if we can get that audio through to listen to how he presented himself. He did a good job procedurally. Oh, man, look what they are doing to Bob Bianchi. They think that they're hurting me if there's no audio. I don't need audio. I can talk about this with Larry and Marni all day long. The video is just getting in my way. So we're going to get to it. But, you know, here's what he basically says. Why and how that he would annihilate his entire family, only he knows. Okay, guys, serenity now. I am not going to get into that. Why, we don't know. We don't, and that's just the way that goes. He talks about the timeline. At 1:45, she gets home, and that I thought was very effective. He strangled her, talks about 2 to 4 minutes, which is scientifically accurate in order to achieve death, and then smothered his daughters. I mean, yeah, Larry, right? I mean, honestly, I get goosebumps when I think about it. And imagine the horror. Look at him. That guy smothered his 2 baby children, one of whom had fought back. That was Bella, according to him, and Celeste, who had no external injuries. I'll stop right there because I'm not sure what clips we're showing or not. But he basically was arguing that this was calculated, and he did it in a calm and deliberate fashion. Marni, it doesn't get worse than that. Killing your babies.
No, it's horrific. And I think it was it was a very powerful way that he described it. He described it in such a way that, you know, both the public and the courtroom would understand that the prosecution says that they have the evidence to back up these allegations. Kind of like you, the why upset me, but it upset me for a slightly different reason. I think it's very strange to say this is all the overwhelming evidence we have, these text messages with a lover, all this stuff, and then say that he doesn't know why, right? Because he would have presented some sort of theory at trial. And I kind of think he should say, it's our belief, but we'll never know what's behind it.
Yeah, I think, Marni, at a certain point in time, he alluded to the idea that he actually went back to his previous statement, whatever, but he wanted a clean slate. And you know, I want to throw this to Larry real quick. You know, Larry, I do an informal, I'm going to give myself a shameless plug, an informal video every Sunday at 5 o'clock on Bianchi Law Talk on Facebook Live. And I did it based upon something an anchor had asked me on another network with regard to why for Christopher Watts. And I started to think to myself, with all the murder cases I tried, let me go through many that I can remember now and ask the why. And I came down to money and sex and trying to cover up crimes and anger. And I came up, but for some reason I feel the murders today are worse than they were 30 years ago. And when I really started to think about it, I realized those motives, including the senseless and the twisted, I use those 2 categories, which this case may fall into, the senseless and the twisted, are still the same motives, but they just seem to be done for less of a reason, like maybe I just want a clean life. And they seem to be more brutal in the manner in which it's executed. Larry, you've been around the block. Do you feel that that's an accurate assessment?
The system is so full of mental illness that we see the results, and the results strike us as horrifying, because in a logical world, these things don't ever happen. What is inside his head? What demons existed there? This can't be explained by greed or love or anything else. These crimes are, to me, a symptom of other things going on that we do not well understand yet. But I can't subscribe to the notion that we are a more violent society. I think we are we're paying more attention but there is nothing that explains this crime to me.
Yeah, I beg to differ on the, respectful, not with you, but I don't think that there's anything that indicates he has a mental health issue with, except potentially extraordinary narcissism, self-centeredism, and I just don't want to be bothered with anything ism to the point where I will take the lives of 4 people, pregnant woman and my 2 children, and that to me is a departure from what standard operating procedures are and how we treat one another as people.
I agree.
Yeah,
but extreme narcissism is a mental illness.
right, gotcha. Okay, we got to go to a break. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. Guys, let me start with you, Larry. We got a real quick, short period of time, but the judge was pretty much to the point. I'm not surprised about the consecutive sentencing. None of that is shocking, but he uses the words senseless and vicious and despicable, and talks about the act of disposal, the most inhumane he's ever handled, and the max is warranted. Gotta be honest with you, I've been doing homicide work on both ends of the aisle for many, many years, and I think that there's just something about this, especially as it relates to dumping your 2 little girls into a drum of oil, that to me is about as bad and callous and senseless and despicable and inhumane a thing I've ever encountered. You?
This crime leaves us all speechless. It just can't be explained.
Yeah, it's and you know what? I think that that's going to be the moral of the story, Larry. I think a lot of people are going to be a little wondering to explain it if it's possible. Marni, what do you think about? Just as, I don't know if you're a mom or not or whatever, but this is heart-wrenching when, I think it was the prosecutor who said not only did he dastardly dispose of these bodies this way, but he separated them so they couldn't even be together in death. Powerful. There's the prosecutor there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I wish that the judge had then said, but I have a guess as to why you did it, because I see these cases all the time. And what I wish he would say is that you are a misogynist and a narcissist, and you're a domestic abuser and domestic killer, because this is violence towards women that is happening in homes all over this country. And we need to start being honest about the whys that men murder their wives. And there is a level of misogyny that I think that we forget. And I agree with Mr. Pozner, there's a level of narcissism that also causes someone to kill someone else.
Yeah,
but I
well,
wish the judge had said that.
I've seen domestic violence. One of the worst domestic violence persons I ever prosecuted was called the Black Widow Murderer. It was a female. She was quite something else. But no matter how you add it up, you were right. Marni, Larry, you guys have been amazing guests. It's been a rocking and rolling day. This is such an important case, and to Marni's point, for us to wrap our hands around this, our arms around it, and kiss the ones we love for sure. Thank God this never happened to us. We're on a break. We'll be right back.